For 10 years, Theodore Walsh fixed broken engines no one was supposed to know about. No contracts, no paperwork, just cash on the workbench and a locked cabinet in the back of his garage filling up with evidence. He logged every defect, every serial number, every lie stamped into the steel, as if waiting for the day the truth would be spoken. Then, one rainy Tuesday, Scarlett Horn, CEO of Horn Motors, walked through his door and begged him to save her company. After a decade of buried truth, one question remained: who actually needed saving? The garage sat at the edge of Route 9, a low cinder-block building with a hand-painted sign that read, Walsh Automotive, in letters faded by 15 winters. Theodore Walsh opened the roll-up door every morning at 6:30, and by 7 he had coffee on the burner and a work order clipped to the wall. He wore the same navy coveralls his father had worn before him, though the name stitched over the chest pocket was his own. Inside, the concrete floor was stained the color of old oil, and the tool chests along the far wall were organized with a precision that did not belong to a small-town mechanic. He had been a senior engine designer once at a firm that no longer existed on paper. He did not talk about that. People in the town of Millbrook knew him as the quiet man who could diagnose a misfire by sound alone, who charged fair prices, who kept to himself. They did not know about the locked steel cabinet in the back office, the one he opened only at night. They did not know about the black binders, inside each one labeled by year, each one filled with serial numbers and defect logs written in a careful engineer's hand. Luna Walsh came by the garage most afternoons after her shift at the community college, where she taught adjunct composition. She was the only family he had left, and the only person who knew the cabinet existed. She did not ask what was inside. She had asked once years ago, and her father had said someday, and she had understood that someday was a door not yet ready to open. She brought him sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and sat on the stool by the workbench while he finished whatever engine was on the lift. The first crate had arrived on a Tuesday in the fall of 2015, 7 months after Theodore had been forced out of his old firm. No paperwork, no return address, just a shipping label with a routing code he recognized from his old life. Inside was a V6 block from a Horn Motors sedan cracked along a stress line he had warned about in a memo the previous spring, the same memo that had ended his career. A white envelope taped to the crate contained $800 in cash and a handwritten note that said, "Fix it, keep quiet, more coming." He stared at that note for a long time before putting it in the first binder. The crates kept coming. One every few weeks, then one every week. Always the same defect, always the same cash, always the same silence. Theodore did what he was paid to do. He also did something he was not paid to do. He photographed each block before he touched it. He logged the serial number, the production date, the pattern of the failure. He saved a fragment of metal from every unit labeled and bagged, stacked in the cabinet in rows, like evidence at a trial that had not yet been called. He did not know who was sending the crates. He suspected, but he did not know. What he knew was that somewhere out on American highways, people were driving cars with engines that would eventually fail under load, and the company that built them was quietly rerouting the evidence to a garage in a town of 4,000 people because it was cheaper than a recall. He kept the binders because he had learned the hard way that silence without proof was the same as complicity. Scarlett Horn ran the company her father had built, and she ran it the way her father had taught her, which was to say she ran it hard. She was 41 years old, sharp-featured, always in charcoal or black, and she had not taken a full week off work in 9 years. Horn Motors had a market cap of $11 billion and a reputation for reliability that was, according to every third-quarter report she had ever signed, the company's most valuable asset. She believed this. She had built her career on protecting it. The first sign of trouble came on a Thursday in October of 2025. A regional news station in Ohio ran a segment on a fatal crash involving a Horn sedan, the third that month, with the same failure signature. By Friday, The story was on cable. By Monday, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration had opened a formal investigation. By the following Wednesday, Horn Motors announced a voluntary recall of 240,000 vehicles, and Scarlett Horn stood in front of a bank of microphones and used the word unforeseen. She did not know at that moment that the word was a lie. She believed it was true. The investigation moved faster than her legal team expected. Internal emails were subpoenaed. A forensic accountant flagged a line item in the operations budget, a recurring cash disbursement, labeled only as external remediation running back nearly a decade. Scarlett had never seen the line item. Her chief operating officer, Oliver Marsh, had approved every payment. When she asked him about it, he smiled the way he always smiled, thin and confident, and told her it was handled. She did not press him. She had trusted him for 15 years. That night, she went home to her apartment on the 38th floor and stood at the window looking at the city, and for the first time since her father's funeral, she felt the specific cold sensation of not knowing what was under her own feet. She called her general counsel at 11. She told him to pull every record of the external remediation payments. She told him she wanted the names of every vendor, every routing code, every recipient. He called her back at 3 a.m. with a single name: Walsh Automotive, Millbrook. 1 mechanic, 1 garage, 10 years. She drove herself. She did not bring security. She did not bring lawyers. She did not call ahead. She wanted to see the man with her own eyes before anyone else put a version of him in her head. The drive took 4 hours. It was raining when she pulled into the gravel lot, a slow November rain that turned the sign above the door into a blur of red letters. She sat in the car for a full minute before she got out. Then she walked through the open bay and found Theodore Walsh standing at a workbench, wiping his hands on a shop rag, watching her come. He knew who she was. He had seen her face in enough quarterly reports. He set the rag down and did not speak. Scarlett stopped 10 feet from him and looked around the garage at the lift, at the neat rows of tools at the door to the back office. Her eyes settled on him again. She said, "I think you have something of mine." Theodore answered, "I have a lot of things of yours." The metal roof held the sound of the rain between them, steady and unbroken. She told him what she had come for. She needed a technical witness. She needed someone who could testify that the defects were isolated, that the company had acted in good faith, that the recall was a responsible correction of a limited problem. She would pay. She would pay whatever number he wrote down. She watched him as she spoke, and she saw that nothing in his expression moved, and that was the first moment she understood she was not in control of this conversation. Theodore listened until she was finished. Then he walked past her, past the lift to the door of the back office. He unlocked it. He stepped inside and turned on a single overhead light, and he waited for her to follow. When she did, she saw the cabinet and the binders and the rows of labeled metal fragments on the shelf above. He said, "Before you ask me to tell any story, you are going to read what actually happened. All 10 years of it. Every page. Then you can decide what you want to pay for." She opened the first binder. She read the first page. She read the second. She read for 40 minutes without sitting down, and somewhere around the third binder, her hand began to shake, and she pressed it flat against the page to stop it. Theodore stood in the doorway and did not speak. He had waited 10 years for someone from that company to read these pages, and he was not going to interrupt her now. When she finally looked up, her face was drained of the authority she had walked in with. She asked him how much of this could be verified. He told her all of it. She asked who else had seen it. He said, "No one." Then she asked what he wanted. He looked at her for a long moment, at the woman who had the power to end him with a phone call, and he understood that the choice in front of him was the choice he had been deferring for a decade. He could close the cabinet, take her money, give her the testimony she wanted, and remain the quiet man in the quiet town. Or he could step into the light with a woman he did not trust, against a system that had already broken him once, and see whether the truth he had been saving was strong enough to carry both of them. He told her, "I want you to look at every page. Then we talk about what comes next." Outside, the weather held against the roof, and neither of them moved toward the door. Scarlett stayed until dawn. She read every binder, and when she finished the last one, she sat on the concrete floor with her back against the shelf because her legs would not hold her. Theodore brought her coffee in a chipped mug and did not speak. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sky had turned the color of dull steel. She asked him in a voice he had not heard from her before how long Oliver had known. Theodore told her the oldest crate was dated the fall of 2015. She did the arithmetic herself and did not say the result out loud. She drove back to the city with the first binder on the passenger seat covered by her coat. She called no one. At the office, she went directly to her general counsel's door and closed it behind her and set the binder on his desk and told him to read. He read for an hour while she stood at the window. When he finished, he said only, "This ends the company." She told him it did not end the company. It ended the men who had hidden it. By the end of that week, the investigation had doubled in size. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration expanded the recall to 400,000 vehicles. 2 class action suits were filed in federal court within 48 hours. The stock lost 31% of its value in 4 trading days. Scarlett held an emergency board meeting and did not tell the board what she had seen in the binders. She told them only that internal review was ongoing. She needed time. She needed the right order of operations, and she did not have it yet. Oliver Marsh sat at the far end of the conference table during that meeting, wearing the same thin, confident smile he always wore. He asked thoughtful questions about communication strategy. He volunteered to lead the response task force. Scarlett watched him across 14 feet of polished walnut and felt something she had not felt toward him in 15 years, which was fear. Not fear of him. Fear of how long she had failed to see him. The leaks began on the following Monday. A financial blog posted a story about a Millbrook mechanic who had received untraceable cash payments from an unnamed Fortune 500 company for a decade. The story named Theodore Walsh. It ran a photograph taken from his driver's license. By noon, a local reporter was in the gravel lot outside the garage. By evening, there were 3. They had questions about undeclared income. They had questions about tax filings. Someone had sent them documents. Theodore did not answer the door. He closed the roll-up bay and locked the office and sat at the workbench with the overhead light off. His phone buzzed against the metal surface with numbers he did not recognize. Luna came in through the side entrance around 8 and set a bag of groceries on the bench and said nothing for a long time. Then she told him, "You knew this would happen." He answered, "I knew something would happen. I did not know it would start with my taxes." The regulars stopped coming. The farmer who brought his truck in every other Thursday did not bring it that week or the week after. The high school coach who had used Walsh Automotive for 20 years drove past the garage twice without stopping. A message was spray-painted on the side wall one night. In red letters, the word, "Liar uneven, already running in the morning damp." Theodore painted over it himself. He did not call the police. He understood the shape of what was happening, and calling the police was not part of the shape. Scarlett came back on the 9th day. She did not bring a lawyer this time either, but she brought a thick folder of internal records she had pulled, without going through legal. She set it on the workbench next to his open toolbox and said, "I need you to match these to your logs." Theodore opened the folder. He recognized the routing codes. He recognized the signatures. Every one of the external remediation disbursements had been approved by Oliver Marsh. Everyone had been coded to a shell account that did not appear on any audit. They worked across the bench together for 2 hours, Scarlett reading out dates, Theodore pulling the matching binder, both of them building the spine of a case that neither had fully assembled alone. Somewhere in the middle of it, she said, "My father would not have done this." Theodore did not look up from the binder. He told her, "I knew your father." She turned her head then and really looked at him. and he could see the moment she understood that the man in front of her had once sat in meetings with her father, had once had a name on the same letterhead she used today. She asked him why he had not gone public 10 years earlier. He closed the binder and set it flat on the bench and considered the question the way he considered a diagnostic reading without hurry. He told her, because 10 years ago I had no proof, only warnings, and the company I warned told the world I was unstable. He said I needed the pattern. I needed it to be undeniable. I needed it to be the kind of record that could not be explained away by one more press release, and I needed to be sure I could stand behind every page. She understood then that the partnership had changed. She had come to him as a buyer of testimony. She was leaving as something else, something for which neither of them had a ready word. It was not friendship. It was not trust, not yet. It was the recognition that the two people in the garage were the only two who knew the true size of what had been hidden, and that knowledge was now a thing they were going to have to carry together, or not at all. Oliver moved next. He did not move clumsily. A press release went out on Horn Motors' letterhead authorized by the communications office he technically did not run, but had always influenced, announcing that the company was cooperating fully with federal investigators and had identified an external contractor whose unauthorized activities were the subject of an internal review. The contractor was not named. The implication was clear. By that evening, every outlet covering the recall had Theodore Walsh's photograph on their homepage and the phrase unauthorized contractor in their headline. A courier arrived at the garage the next morning with an envelope from a law firm in Chicago. Inside was an offer. $3 million paid in a structured settlement over 5 years in exchange for a signed non-disclosure agreement and the surrender of all documents, photographs, and physical samples held at Walsh Automotive. A second envelope contained a draft statement already prepared, in which Theodore admitted to operating outside the scope of any formal agreement with Horn Motors and took responsibility for what the statement called irregularities in the handling of defective components. Theodore read both documents once. He put them back in the envelope and sealed it with tape. He drove to the post office and sent it back to the Chicago address without a note. The offer returned, whole unsigned and unacknowledged. That afternoon, a second courier arrived with a revised offer. The number was $5 million. He did not open that one at all. He put it in the cabinet in the back behind the binders. Luna found him in the office that night. She told him they are going to destroy you. He said they are trying. She said you could take the money. He looked at her across the small room and answered, "Your grandfather built this garage to fix things honestly. If I sign that paper, I am not fixing anything. I am agreeing that the thing they broke was mine." She did not argue with him. She sat down on the stool and stayed until he turned off the light. The call came on a Tuesday. It was Scarlett from a number he did not recognize. She said only, "Can you come to the city tonight?" He made the drive a second time that month now in the opposite direction, the city's lights smearing across his windshield through a thin, cold drizzle. She met him in the lobby of a law office at 11 at night. She was carrying a single manila folder. She did not speak until they were behind a closed door. Then she opened the folder and laid a single sheet of paper on the table in front of him. It was a handwritten note. Theodore recognized the handwriting before he recognized the words. It was Oliver's. The note was dated October of 2015. It read, "Redirect all Unit 4 defect returns to external remediation. No internal log entries maintain containment indefinitely per previous discussion." There was a signature, half a signature. Really the way Oliver initialed internal memos, when he did not want them to look official. Scarlett told him it was in a locked drawer in his office. The general counsel had the drawer opened yesterday, under a preservation order. There are 3 other pages. This is the clearest one. Theodore looked at the note for a long time. He told her, "This is the piece I never had." She answered, "I know." He asked where it was now. She told him it was in federal custody as of that morning. The board had been informed. The board had voted to remove Oliver. He had been escorted from the building 4 hours earlier. He should have felt relief. He did not. He looked across the table at Scarlett and saw the same thing in her face, which was the understanding that the note did not end anything. The note began the part that could not be stopped. Once it was in federal custody, the investigation was no longer about a recall. It was about a decade of fraud, and fraud of that size required a public trial, and a public trial required a witness who could testify to the entire pattern of defects, a witness whose credibility had already been destroyed in every major newspaper in the country over the preceding 2 weeks. Scarlett told him, "They are going to call you." He said, "I know." She told him his name was already being run through every search engine in the country with the word unauthorized attached to it. By the time he sat down in that chair, half the country would have already decided he was the villain of this story. He said, "I know that too." She asked whether he was going to do it anyway. He looked at her across the table. The clock on the wall read 11:47. Outside, the drizzle had turned to something harder, a kind of sleet against the windows. He told her, "I spent 10 years filling that cabinet because I wanted the record to exist, whether anyone ever read it or not. If I stopped now, the cabinet was a waste of my life." He said, "I will testify." Scarlett nodded once. She put the note back in the folder. She told him then, "We need to prepare, because once the subpoena arrives, every resource Oliver still controls will be used to make you unrecognizable in a witness chair." He said, "Let them." She looked at him across the table with something that was not quite gratitude and not quite apology, and they sat with the folder between them until the clock read past midnight. The subpoena arrived at the garage on a Thursday morning in a plain envelope. Theodore read it standing at the workbench with his coveralls still zipped halfway. The hearing was set for the 2nd week of December in the federal courthouse in Washington. He drove the envelope out to Luna's apartment that evening and left it on her kitchen table without speaking. She read it, folded it back along its original creases, and told him she would drive him to the airport herself. The 2 weeks before the hearing were the quietest of his life. He kept the garage closed. He did not answer the phone. He sat at the workbench some nights until 2 in the morning, going through each binder one more time, annotating pages in a small notebook he would carry into the witness room. He was not preparing to perform. He was preparing to remember under pressure, which was a different discipline, and one he had trained for over 10 years without knowing it. Scarlett called twice. The first call was a list of the prosecution's expected questions, which she had obtained through legal channels that were almost, but not entirely proper. The second call was shorter. She said only, "Whatever happens in that room, you did the work. I did not." He answered, "You did the part you could do. That is not nothing." Her reply came after a stretch of quiet on the line. She told him she would be in the gallery. He said that was a mistake. She said she knew she was coming anyway. The morning of the hearing, he wore a charcoal suit that had not left his closet in 10 years. The sleeves were slightly short at the wrist. He carried the notebook in an inside pocket and a single binder in a plain leather case. The courthouse corridor outside the chamber was crowded with reporters, and when he walked through them, no one shouted his name, because the name had already been spoken so many times in the preceding month that seeing him in person produced, instead of questions, a kind of watchful silence. Oliver Marsh was already seated at the defense table when Theodore entered the chamber. He did not look up. His attorneys flanked him in dark suits, and in front of him on the table were stacks of tabbed binders designed to look like a record. Theodore understood the performance of those binders. He had spent a decade building the real thing. He took his seat at the witness stand and placed his one binder on the rail in front of him and looked out over the room once briefly and found Scarlett in the 3rd row of the gallery, watching him with no expression at all. The prosecutor led him through the first hour slowly. Dates, serial numbers, the shipping records he had kept, the photographs he had taken of each engine block before disassembly. Theodore answered plainly without flourish. When the prosecutor asked how he could verify that a given fragment corresponded to a given crate, he opened the binder to the correct page and read the chain of evidence aloud in the same voice he used to explain a repair estimate to a customer. The jury was given copies. The judge requested the binder be entered as the central exhibit. The cross-examination came after lunch. Oliver's lead attorney introduced himself to the court as Gregory Hollis, a tall man with an expensive haircut and a reputation earned over 2 decades of corporate defense work for dismantling technical witnesses. Hollis began with Theodore's termination from the engineering firm 10 years earlier. He used the word unstable. He used the phrase documented pattern of professional misconduct. He read aloud from an internal memo Theodore had never been allowed to see, at the time a memo that characterized his original defect warnings as the product of personal grievance rather than engineering analysis. Theodore listened until Hollis finished. Then he answered the question he had not been asked. He said the memo you just read was written by Oliver Marsh in April of 2015. It is the memo that ended my career. It is also word for word the justification he used 6 months later to approve the first shipment of defective engines to my garage under an unauthorized remediation code. He said if the memo is accurate, the shipments should not exist. If the shipments exist, the memo was a lie. Both cannot be true. Hollis objected. The judge overruled. The prosecutor, without speaking, slid a second document across the table to the bench. It was the handwritten note from Oliver's drawer, the one Scarlett had placed in front of Theodore on a Tuesday night in a darkened law office. It was now a federal exhibit. The judge read it. He read it again. He asked Hollis whether the defense wished to contest the authenticity of the handwriting. Hollis, after consulting with his client for nearly a minute, did not respond. The room shifted then. It did not shift loudly. Theodore had sat through enough technical reviews in his life to recognize the specific quality of a room when its center of gravity moves. The jurors stopped writing for a moment. The court reporter kept typing. Oliver looked up for the first time since Theodore had entered the chamber, and the thin, confident smile was gone, replaced by something smaller and more human. And Theodore did not feel triumph looking at him. He felt the cost of 10 years. The testimony continued for another 2 hours, but the pattern was set. Every question Hollis asked Theodore answered out of the binder. Every contradiction Hollis tried to open the records closed before it could develop. By the time the prosecution rested its direct examination, the line of attack built on Theodore's credibility had nowhere left to stand. The documents in front of the court predated every argument against them, and there was no version of the story in which a forged memo written first could invalidate a real record written later. The indictment came down 3 weeks later. Oliver Marsh was charged with federal wire fraud obstruction of a safety investigation and conspiracy to conceal a defective product. The indictment ran 47 pages. Scarlett was named in none of them. The prosecutor's office issued a brief statement noting that the chief executive of Horn Motors had cooperated fully with the investigation and had been instrumental in producing key internal evidence. The stock, which had continued to fall throughout the hearings, stabilized within a week. It did not recover, but it stopped bleeding. Scarlett came to the garage one last time on a cold morning in January. She did not bring a folder. She stood in the open bay with her hands in the pockets of her coat and looked at the tool chests along the far wall. She told him the board had asked her to stay through the end of the restructuring. She told him she had agreed on the condition that the company issue a formal correction to every public record that had referenced him as an unauthorized contractor. The correction, she said, had gone out that morning. Theodore thanked her. She told him not to. She said, "I spent 15 years believing I inherited a company. I spent the last 2 months learning I inherited a cover." She told him she did not know yet what she was going to do with the rest of her time at Horn Motors, but she knew she was not going to run it the way her father had. She said, "He taught me the company was the asset." She said, "You taught me the asset is the truth." Then she shook his hand, and she walked out of the bay. and she did not look back. A letter arrived at the garage the following week from the United States Patent Office. A review had been conducted on 3 patents originally filed by Horn Motors in the mid-2000s. The filings had omitted a co-inventor. The omission had been corrected. The letter listed the patents by number and confirmed that the name Theodore James Walsh had been added to the record, effective retroactively to the original filing dates. He read the letter twice. He put it in the cabinet, on the top shelf next to the first binder. Luna came by that evening. She saw the letter. She asked him whether he wanted to frame it. He told her he did not. She sat on the stool by the workbench and looked around the garage at the lift, at the tools, at the roll-up door, open to the cold, clear night. She told him, "I used to think this place was where you hid." He answered it was. She told him it is not anymore. He agreed with her. He told her this is not where things get hidden. This is where they get fixed. He turned off the overhead light. He locked the office. He walked out with his daughter into the parking lot, and behind them, the sign above the door caught the last of the streetlight, the red letter steady against the dark.